Alexander Rothwell stared at the screen, his jaw tight, his fingers frozen over the black titanium card that had never failed him in 20 years. Behind him, the line was growing. A woman shifted her grocery bags. A teenager sighed loudly. And at the front of it all, standing barely 4 feet tall, with a backpack almost as big as she was, a little girl watched him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Sir, do you have another form of payment?" the cashier asked, her voice tight with forced politeness. Alexander's mind raced through impossible scenarios. System glitch. Bank error. Fraud alert. This card had a limit so high it was practically theoretical. He'd bought a yacht with it last month, without a second thought. The girl stepped forward. "I can help," she said quietly. Her hand emerged from her pocket holding a crumpled $20 bill, smoothed out against her palm like it was made of gold leaf. Alexander looked down at her, really looked at her for the first time. Faded jeans with careful patches at the knees. Sneakers held together with duct tape decorated to look like racing stripes. But her eyes, those eyes carried the weight of someone who'd learned to count pennies before she could count to 100. "Keep your money, kid," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "This is just a technical issue." But as he reached for his phone to call the bank, one question burned in his mind. Why would a child who clearly had so little offer to pay for a stranger's groceries? 2 days earlier, Alexander Rothwell had been untouchable. The penthouse suite, the corner office with 360-degree views, the speaking engagements where people paid $50,000 just to hear him talk about disruption and market domination. He'd built his fortune on predictive algorithms, on seeing patterns others missed, on never trusting anything that couldn't be measured and monetized. Trust was expensive. Alexander had learned that lesson the hard way. 15 years ago, his business partner, his best friend since college, had embezzled $40 million and disappeared to a country with no extradition treaty. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Not the money. He'd made that back in 18 months. But the friendship, the belief that loyalty meant something. Since then, Alexander operated on a simple principle. People showed you who they were through their actions, not their words. And in his experience, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. He just never expected to find the exception in aisle 7 of a grocery store in a neighborhood he'd only driven through by accident because his driver had called in sick. The girl's name was Emma Chen, though Alexander didn't know that yet. What he knew was this. She came into the Morrison Street grocery every Tuesday and Friday after school, always alone, always buying the exact same things. 1 gallon of milk, 1 loaf of wheat bread, bananas just starting to brown because they were 40 cents cheaper. Sometimes a can of soup. Never candy. Never treats. Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked the register for 30 years, knew Emma's routine by heart. She'd slip an extra apple into the bag when Emma wasn't looking, or round down a few cents on the total. Small kindnesses that Emma never acknowledged because she was too proud, or too scared, or too something Mrs. Patterson couldn't quite name. But today was different. Today, Emma had arrived just as Alexander's world was quietly imploding. The card reader's rejection wasn't a glitch. It was a message. While Alexander had been in back-to-back meetings, his accounts had been frozen. Not by the bank, by someone with enough access and authority to lock down everything he owned. Someone close to him. Someone he'd trusted. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your portfolio. Consider this a lesson in humility. L. Lawrence Hartwick." His current CFO. The man he'd hired 6 months ago based on impeccable references and an MIT pedigree. The man who'd been systematically positioning himself to execute the exact same betrayal that had nearly destroyed Alexander 15 years ago. But Alexander didn't know the full scope yet. All he knew was that his card wasn't working, and a child was offering him money she clearly needed more than he did. "I'm serious, mister," Emma said, pushing the 20 toward him. "You can pay me back later." The cashier looked between them, her hand hovering over the register, unsure of protocol. Alexander's groceries weren't even expensive. A prepared sandwich, bottled water, aspirin, the emergency supplies of a man who'd been too focused on quarterly reports to remember he was human and needed to eat. Total, $17.43. Emma's 20 would cover it with change to spare. Why? Alexander asked, his voice lower now, genuinely curious. You don't know me. Emma shrugged, but something flickered in her expression. A memory, maybe, or a lesson learned the hard way. My mom says when someone needs help and you can give it, you do, even if it's hard. The words hit Alexander harder than they should have. When was the last time someone had helped him without wanting something in return? When was the last time he'd helped someone the same way? He couldn't remember. Tell you what, he said, making a decision that felt reckless and right at the same time. I'll accept your loan on one condition. You let me buy you lunch, and we call it even. Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion, wise beyond her years. I'm not supposed to go anywhere with strangers. Smart kid. How about we stay right here? There's a cafe section in the store. You pick whatever you want. I'll sit 3 tables away if that makes you more comfortable. And Mrs. Patterson here can keep an eye on both of us. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, her protective instincts balanced against her recognition that this child probably hadn't had a full meal in days. Emma considered this for a long moment, her small hand still clutching the 20. Okay, she finally said, but I'm keeping my backpack with me. She said it with such fierce protectiveness that Alexander found himself wondering what could be so valuable in a child's worn backpack that she'd guard it like that. He had no idea he'd just asked the question that would unravel everything he thought he knew about value, about worth, about what mattered. The cafe section of Morrison Street Grocery was nothing special. For tables with mismatched chairs, a hot bar with rotating soups and pre-made sandwiches under heat lamps, a coffee station that dispensed liquid that was technically coffee but tasted like regret. Emma chose a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, then hesitated over the cookie display before shaking her head and turning away. You can get a cookie too, Alexander said, careful to keep his distance like he'd promised. The sandwich and soup are enough, Emma said, but her eyes lingered on the chocolate chip cookies for just a second too long. Alexander grabbed 2 cookies and added them to the tray before Emma could protest. They sat at separate tables as agreed. Emma methodically worked through her food with the focused intensity of someone who didn't know when the next meal might come. Alexander watched her peripherally while pretending to check his phone, trying to piece together the equation that didn't add up. A child, maybe 9 or 10 years old, shopping alone, buying staples, not snacks, offering her last $20 to a stranger, guarding her backpack like it contained state secrets. The pattern suggested poverty. But there was something else, a specific kind of discipline that came from managing a crisis, not just hardship. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his personal attorney. Alexander, we have a situation. Your signature appears on several documents authorizing fund transfers I know you didn't approve. Lawrence Hartwick has been stealing from me, Alexander finished. I know. How bad? Bad enough that if we can't prove fraud in the next 72 hours, you're going to lose access to everything while the investigation proceeds. He's claiming you authorized him to restructure your holdings for tax purposes. The paper trail is extremely sophisticated. Alexander closed his eyes. History repeating itself, but this time he'd seen it coming. This time he'd been keeping his own records, his own evidence, just in case. Trust, but verify. The lesson he'd learned too late 15 years ago. Send me everything you have, Alexander said. I'll handle it. He ended the call and looked up to find Emma watching him with those 2 old eyes. You okay, mister? She asked. The question was so simple, so genuine, that Alexander felt something crack in his chest. I've been better, he admitted. Someone I trusted is trying to take things that don't belong to them. Emma nodded slowly, like she understood betrayal on a personal level. My dad did that, she said quietly. He took everything and left. That's why it's just me and my mom now. The words hung in the air between them, a confession exchanged for a confession. I'm sorry, Alexander said, and meant it. Emma shrugged with practiced nonchalance that didn't quite hide the hurt. Mom says some people don't know how to stay. She says that's their problem, not ours. Smart mom, Alexander thought. He was beginning to understand where Emma had learned to count the cost of everything. "Does your mom know you're here?" he asked carefully. Emma's hand went to her backpack, that protective gesture again. "She's at work. I'm supposed to go straight to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment after I get the groceries. She watches me until Mom gets home." "What does your mom do?" "She's a nurse. She works a lot of double shifts." Another piece of the puzzle. A single mother working herself to exhaustion. A daughter learning independence too early. Groceries bought with ruthless efficiency because every dollar mattered. But Alexander still couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. The way Emma touched her backpack, the old eyes in a young face, the willingness to give away money she clearly needed. Before he could ask another question, the moment shattered. A man in an expensive suit walked into the grocery store, spotted Alexander immediately, and headed straight for their section with the kind of purposeful stride that meant trouble. Lawrence Hartwick had found him. "Alexander," Lawrence said, his voice smooth as oil. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about the restructuring." Alexander stood slowly, positioning himself between Lawrence and Emma without even thinking about it. "I'm sure we do, Lawrence. Especially the part where you forged my signature on documents transferring $40 million into offshore accounts." Lawrence's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof, because my lawyers are very good at making unfounded claims very expensive." "Funny thing about betrayal," Alexander said quietly. "You only fall for it once if you're smart. This time I kept my own records. Every meeting, every document, every email. Would you like to explain to the Securities and Exchange Commission why your restructuring plan looks identical to the embezzlement scheme my former partner used 15 years ago?" For the first time, Lawrence's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Let's find out together. I'm meeting with federal investigators tomorrow morning. You're welcome to join us." Lawrence's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered to Emma, then back to Alexander. "You've always been too sentimental, Alexander. It's your weakness. You think loyalty matters. You think people can be trusted. But everyone has a price. Everyone." He turned and walked out, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Emma's voice cut through the tension. "Is he the one who's stealing from you?" Alexander nodded. "Yeah, but he's not going to get away with it." "Good," Emma said fiercely. "People like that deserve to lose everything." The intensity in her voice made Alexander look at her sharply. This wasn't abstract moral judgment. This was personal. "Your dad," he said carefully. "He didn't just leave, did he?" Emma's hand went to her backpack again, and this time Alexander saw her fingers trace the outline of something inside. Something flat and rectangular. Paper, maybe. "He cleaned out their bank account 3 weeks before he left," Emma said, her voice matter-of-fact in the way children learn to be when emotion was too dangerous. "Mom came home from a double shift and found the note. He said he needed a fresh start. He said we were holding him back." Alexander felt fury rise in his chest, not at Lawrence this time, but at a man he'd never met who'd abandoned his family like they were failed investments. "That's not on you or your mom," Alexander said. "That's on him. That's his failure, not yours." "I know," Emma said, but her voice wavered just enough to reveal the lie. She checked her phone, a flip phone so old it belonged in a museum, and stood abruptly. "I have to go. Mrs. Rodriguez gets worried if I'm late." She gathered her backpack with both hands, careful not to let it tip or shift. "Thank you for lunch, Mr. Alexander," he said. "My name is Alexander." "Thank you, Alexander." She started to leave, then paused and turned back. "I hope you get your stuff back. And I hope that man gets what he deserves." Then she was gone, disappearing into the after-school crowd on the sidewalk, her too big backpack bouncing against her small frame. Alexander stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. Mrs. Patterson approached with a knowing look. "That child has more weight on her shoulders than any kid should carry," she said quietly. "But she never complains, never asks for help, just comes in twice a week, buys the bare minimum, and leaves." "What about her mother?" "Sarah Chun. Good woman. Works herself to the bone at County Hospital. Picks up every extra shift they'll give her. Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then added, I heard her on the phone once, arguing with the billing department about a payment plan. Medical bills, I think. The pieces started to fit together in Alexander's mind, but the picture they formed didn't make sense yet. A nurse working double shifts should make enough to cover basics. Medical bills could explain financial strain, but Emma's fierce protectiveness of her backpack, the specific way she guarded it, suggested something more immediate, something urgent. Alexander pulled out his phone and did what he did best. He looked for patterns in data. County Hospital Billing Department. Payment plans. Sarah Chun. It took him 15 minutes and 3 phone calls to people who owed him favors before he had the answer. Sarah Chun wasn't paying off old medical bills. She was trying to cover the cost of her own surgery. Stage 3 cervical cancer, diagnosed 4 months ago. The words glowed on Alexander's laptop screen like an accusation. He sat in his car outside the grocery store, reading medical records he had no legal right to access, but had obtained anyway through a complex chain of favors and ethical gray areas he'd justify later. Sarah Chun had been managing symptoms for 6 months before the diagnosis, writing them off as stress and exhaustion because she couldn't afford to miss work for doctor's appointments. By the time she'd finally gone to the emergency room, the cancer had advanced to a stage that required aggressive treatment. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. The total cost, $240,000. Her insurance covered 60% after deductibles. The hospital had offered a payment plan for the remaining $96,000, but even with her nursing salary and extra shifts, Sarah was barely making minimum payments while keeping food on the table and a roof over their heads. She'd been given a choice: pay for the surgery now and go into debt that would take 20 years to clear, or wait and hope the cancer didn't progress while she saved money she didn't have. She'd chosen to wait, and Emma knew. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the final piece fell into place. The backpack. Emma wasn't just protecting her school supplies. She was protecting money. Every dollar she could save. Every penny she could hide away. Every sacrifice she could make. A 9-year-old child was trying to save her mother's life with lunch money and birthday cash and whatever small amounts she could tuck away without her mother noticing. That's why she bought the cheapest groceries. Why she never got treats. Why she'd offered her last $20 to a stranger. Because in Emma's world, helping others was what you did even when you had nothing. Because that's what her mother had taught her. And Emma was trying desperately to be worthy of a woman who was dying by degrees while working double shifts. Alexander sat in his car and felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 15 years. Shame. Not at his wealth. Not at his success. But at how easily he'd let betrayal turn him cold. How completely he'd insulated himself from the kind of basic human connection that would lead a child to offer help to a stranger. Lawrence was wrong. Not everyone had a price. Some people just had love, and that made them do impossible things. Alexander made 3 phone calls. The first was to his attorney. Accelerate the case against Lawrence. I want him arrested within 48 hours. Use every resource we have. The second was to County Hospital's chief financial officer, who happened to sit on a board with Alexander. I need you to pull Sarah Chen's account. I'm covering the balance. All of it. And I want the surgery scheduled within the week. The third call was to his own doctor, one of the best oncologists in the state. I'm sending you a patient file. Sarah Chen, I need you to review her case and consult on her treatment plan. Money is no object. I want the best possible outcome. Then Alexander did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went looking for someone not because they could give him something, but because he had something to give them. He found Emma 4 days later, sitting on the steps outside Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment building. She looked up when his car pulled up, her expression cautious, but not afraid. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Alexander. Hey, Emma. Got a minute? She glanced at the apartment window, where Mrs. Rodriguez's silhouette watched from behind curtains. I guess. But I can't go anywhere. I'm not asking you to. I just wanted to talk. He sat on the steps beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. Emma's backpack sat between her feet, positioned like a guard dog. I did something I probably shouldn't have, Alexander said. I looked into your mom's situation. The medical bills. Emma went very still. That's private. You're right. It is. And I'm sorry for invading your privacy. But I need you to listen to me for just a minute, okay? Emma's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Alexander of himself. Your mom's surgery, he continued. It's been scheduled for next Tuesday. And it's paid for. The whole thing. Treatment, recovery, everything. Emma's head whipped toward him, her eyes wide with shock, and something that looked like anger. We don't need charity. My mom works hard. We can pay our own bills. This isn't charity, Emma. This is, call it a loan if you want. Call it paying forward the $20 you offered me. Call it whatever you need to call it. But your mom needs that surgery now, not in 2 years when you've saved enough lunch money. Emma's face crumpled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like the child she actually was. How did you know? About the money you're saving? I didn't know for sure until just now. But I recognized the pattern. The way you guarded your backpack. The way you bought the cheapest groceries. The way you offered help even though you had nothing to spare. He paused. You carry the money with you because you're afraid if you leave it at home, your mom will find it and use it for bills instead of her surgery. A single tear tracked down Emma's cheek. I have $417, she whispered. I've been saving for 8 months. I was going to give it to her when I had $500. I thought maybe if I gave her something, she'd agree to the surgery. $417. Saved dollar by a child who should have been buying ice cream and comic books and silly things that didn't matter. Emma, your mom would never take that money. I know. That's why I wasn't going to give her a choice. I was going to tell the hospital it was a down payment, and she had to go through with it. Alexander felt his throat tighten. That's the bravest, most selfless thing I've ever heard. But you don't have to do this alone anymore. Your mom's surgery is happening. She's going to be okay. And you get to be a kid again. Emma shook her head fiercely. I can't let you do this. We don't even know you. You know I'm someone who needed help, and you gave it to me without thinking twice. That tells me everything I need to know about you and your mom. You're good people, and good people deserve help when they need it. But why? What do you get out of this? The question was so direct, so cynical for a 9-year-old, that Alexander understood just how deeply her father's betrayal had cut. Honestly, I get to remember that not everyone's looking for an angle. I get to remember that trust isn't always a mistake. Your mom taught you to help people even when it costs you. She taught you right. And maybe by helping you, I learned that lesson myself. Emma stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming freely now. My mom's going to be okay. She's going to be okay. I've got one of the best oncologists in the state consulting on her case. She's scheduled for surgery Tuesday morning, and the recovery program is already in place. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. For days ago in a grocery store, when you offered your last $20 to a stranger. That's worth more than you know. They sat in silence for a moment, watching cars pass on the street. What happened with the man who was stealing from you? Emma asked. He was arrested yesterday. Fraud, embezzlement, forging documents. He won't be hurting anyone else. Good. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn envelope stuffed with bills, 1s, 5s, a few 10s, all carefully sorted and rubber-banded. $417 that represented 8 months of sacrifice. I want to give this to someone else who needs help, she said. Mom always says if you have something to share, you share it. Maybe there's another kid whose mom is sick. Alexander felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked and frozen for 15 years. I think that's a beautiful idea. How about we set up a fund at the hospital? The Emma Chun Emergency Medical Fund. It'll help families who can't afford treatment. And we'll start it with your $417. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? They do that. They'll do that. And I'll match whatever you put in. For every dollar you contribute, I'll contribute 1,000. Your $417 becomes $417,000. That's a lot of families we can help. Emma looked down at the envelope in her hands, then back at Alexander. You do that? Just like that. Just like that. You taught me something important, Emma. You taught me that the value of money isn't what it can buy for you. It's what it can do for others. Emma threw her arms around him in a fierce hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds before she pulled back, embarrassed. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Alexander said back. Sarah Chen's surgery was successful. Alexander wasn't there. He'd made sure of that. This wasn't about credit or gratitude. This was about a family getting the chance they deserved. But he received updates through the oncologist. The margins were clear. The lymph nodes were clean. The prognosis was excellent. Sarah would need radiation and monitoring, but she was expected to make a full recovery. 2 weeks after the surgery, Alexander received a letter in the mail. No return address, but he recognized Emma's careful handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper and a photograph. The letter read, Dear Alexander, Mom is home from the hospital. She's doing really good. The doctors say she's going to be okay. She cried when they told her someone had paid for everything. She said she didn't deserve that kind of help. I told her she did because she helps people every single day, and sometimes it's okay to be the person who gets helped. She asked me if I knew who did it. I told her I met someone who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help when you need it. Thank you for giving me my mom back. Thank you for teaching me that there are still good people who do good things. Love, Emma. P.S. The hospital said the Emma Chun Emergency Medical Fund is already helping 3 families. Mom says she's proud of me. I think she'd be proud of you, too. The photograph showed Emma and her mother in a hospital room. Sarah was thin and tired but smiling, her arm around her daughter. Emma held up a sign that read, Thank you for believing in us. Alexander pinned the photo to his office wall, right next to his degrees and awards and all the markers of success he'd accumulated over 20 years. But when clients came in and asked about it, he never explained. Some things were too valuable to put into words. 3 months later, Alexander stood in the Morrison Street grocery, intentionally this time. Mrs. Patterson smiled when she saw him. Mr. Rothwell, back for more of our gourmet sandwiches. Something like that. How's Emma doing? Good. Really good. Her mom's back at work part-time, and Emma's actually acting like a kid now. Saw her buying candy last week. First time ever. Alexander smiled. That's good. That's really good. He picked up his items, a prepared sandwich, bottled water, aspirin, because some habits died hard, and headed to the register. His card worked perfectly this time. All his accounts had been unfrozen after Lawrence's arrest. The investigation had revealed a scheme even more elaborate than Alexander had suspected, targeting 3 other executives in addition to him. Lawrence was facing 20 years in federal prison. Justice served cold. But as Alexander took his receipt and headed for the door, he realized something had shifted. The victory felt hollow compared to the letter from Emma. The recovered money felt meaningless compared to Sarah Chen's recovery. For 15 years, he'd measured success in dollars and market share and quarterly earnings. But a 9-year-old girl had taught him a different calculus. Success was Emma buying candy because she didn't have to save every penny for her mother's surgery. Success was Sarah Chen going back to work because she was healthy, not because she was desperate. Success was a fund that would help families who found themselves in the same impossible situation, choosing between financial ruin and medical care. Alexander's phone buzzed with an alert. The Emma Chun Emergency Medical Fund had just crossed $1 million in donations. The story had gotten out, not through Alexander, but through word of mouth at the hospital. People wanted to help. People wanted to be part of something that mattered. And this is where everything shifted, because now it wasn't just about betrayal and revenge and protecting what was his. It was about building something that would outlast him, about creating a legacy that mattered more than a bank balance. He'd spent 15 years learning the wrong lessons from trust broken. Emma had taught him the right one in a single act of generosity. 6 months after the surgery, Alexander received another letter. This one came to his office, properly addressed, with Sarah Chen's name in the return address corner. He opened it carefully. Dear Mr. Rothwell, I don't have adequate words to thank you for what you've done for my family. Emma told me about meeting you at the grocery store, though I suspect there's more to that story than either of you has shared with me. For months, I lived with the weight of an impossible choice: provide for my daughter now, or save my own life for her future. I thought I had to choose. You showed me I didn't. The doctors tell me I am in complete remission. I'm back at work full-time, and for the first time in years, I'm not drowning. I'm swimming. I'm moving forward. But more than that, you gave my daughter something I couldn't give her: hope. She'd stopped being a child somewhere along the way, carrying burdens that weren't hers to carry. Now she plays. She laughs. She dreams about the future instead of worrying about tomorrow. Emma told me about the fund you established in her name. She told me about matching her savings. She told me that you said the value of money is what it can do for others. You're teaching my daughter lessons about generosity and humanity that will shape who she becomes. That's a gift beyond price. We'd like to meet you properly, if you're willing. Not to thank you, though we'll do that anyway, but because Emma says you're her friend, and I'd like to know the man who gave us our future back. With deepest gratitude, Sarah Chun. Alexander read the letter 3 times, then picked up his phone. The coffee shop Sarah chose was neutral territory. Not too expensive, not too casual. Alexander arrived early and ordered tea. He didn't drink, watching the door and wondering why he was nervous. He'd faced boardrooms full of hostile investors without breaking a sweat. He'd negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions with perfect composure. But meeting a 9-year-old girl and her mother felt more important than any of that. They arrived exactly on time. Sarah walked with the careful movement of someone still recovering, but determined not to show weakness. Emma bounced beside her, her backpack notably lighter now. Sarah extended her hand with a nurse's firm grip. "Mr. Rothwell, thank you for meeting with us. Alexander, please." "And it's my pleasure." They sat, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Emma broke the silence. "I told Mom everything. About your card getting declined. About Lawrence stealing from you. About the loan you said I gave you." Sarah's eyes were bright with emotion. She told me how you sat 3 tables away to make her feel safe. How you listened when she talked about her father. How you understood that helping someone isn't about what you get back. "Emma made it easy," Alexander said. "She's remarkable. She learned it from you." Emma said to her mother, "You always help people even when we don't have extra. You taught me that." Sarah's hand covered Emma's, "And you reminded me of it when I'd almost forgotten." They talked for an hour, about Sarah's recovery, about Emma's school, about the fund, which had now helped 12 families, about everything and nothing. But what struck Alexander most was the normalcy of it. They weren't treating him like a savior or a benefactor. They were treating him like a friend. When it was time to leave, Emma pulled something from her backpack. "I made this for you," she said shyly. It was a drawing, carefully colored with markers. 2 stick figures standing in a grocery store. One tall, one small. Between them, a heart with the words, "Thank you for teaching me that kindness is the most valuable thing we own." Alexander felt his throat close. "I'll treasure this, Emma. Thank you." As they walked toward the door, Sarah touched his arm. "Emma told me what you said about trust. About how you'd stopped believing in people after someone betrayed you." "I did," Alexander admitted. And now, he looked at Emma, skipping ahead with the light-hearted energy of a child who didn't have to carry the weight of the world anymore. "Now I think I was measuring the wrong things. I thought trust was a weakness because it could be exploited. But Emma showed me that withholding trust is the real weakness. It keeps you safe, but it keeps you alone." Sarah smiled, and he saw where Emma had gotten her wise eyes. She has that effect on people. She makes you want to be better than you are. She made me remember who I used to be, before I let fear make my decisions. They shook hands at the door, but Sarah pulled him into a brief hug. "Thank you for saving my life," she whispered. "And thank you for reminding me why it's worth saving." The Emma Chun Emergency Medical Fund reached $5 million within the year. Alexander established a permanent endowment, ensuring it would continue long after he was gone. The fund helped hundreds of families facing impossible medical choices, providing emergency assistance for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Each grant recipient received a letter with their approval notice. The letter explained that the fund was started by a 9-year-old girl who saved her lunch money for 8 months to help her mother, and that her generosity had inspired others to do the same. The letter ended with a question: when you're well again, how will you help someone else? The ripple effect was exponential. Families who received help went on to help others. Medical professionals donated services. Businesses contributed matching funds. The fund became a movement, proof that compassion was contagious. And Alexander, who had spent 15 years believing that everyone had a price, learned that some people just had love, and that made them priceless. Years passed. Lawrence Hartwick served his sentence in federal prison, a cautionary tale in business schools about the cost of betrayal. Sarah Chin remained in full remission, continuing her work as a nurse and volunteering with a medical fund that bore her daughter's name. Emma grew up strong and kind, carrying the lessons of that grocery store encounter into everything she did. And Alexander Rothwell, the billionaire who'd lost faith in humanity, found it again in the most unexpected place, in a child's willingness to give her last $20 to a stranger, and in the trust that came from accepting help when you needed it most. He never forgot the moment his card was declined, not because it was embarrassing or humiliating, but because it was the moment he stopped measuring worth in dollars and started measuring it in what matters: kindness, generosity, trust, love, the things that had no price because they were invaluable. 5 years after that day in the grocery store, Alexander received one final letter from Emma. She was 14 now, writing from a high school where she'd just been accepted into an advanced medical program. Dear Alexander, I'm going to be a doctor. I decided last year when I was volunteering at the hospital and met a family using the fund we started. Their daughter had the same kind of cancer my mom had, and they were so scared. I helped them fill out the application, and when they got approved, they cried and hugged me and said I'd saved their daughter's life. But I didn't save anyone. You did, and my mom did, and the $417 did, and the thousands of people who donated did. We all saved each other. That's what I want to do with my life. I want to save people, not just with medicine, but with hope, with kindness, with the reminder that even when things seem impossible, there are people who care. You taught me that 5 years ago, when you could have just fixed your card and walked away. You chose to see me instead. You chose to help even when you were dealing with your own crisis. That's the kind of doctor I want to be. That's the kind of person I want to be. Thank you for showing me that worth isn't about what you have. It's about what you give. Love always. Emma. P.S. Mom wanted me to tell you she's volunteering as a patient advocate now, helping other families navigate cancer treatment. She says you started a revolution of kindness, and she's proud to be part of it. Alexander folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer next to Emma's original drawing and all the other reminders of what really mattered. Then he pulled up the fund's website and made another contribution. Not because the fund needed it, it was self-sustaining now, but because Emma was right. They had all saved each other. And the saving wasn't finished yet. The Morrison Street grocery closed down eventually, replaced by a development project that turned the neighborhood into something shinier, but somehow less real. But Mrs. Patterson kept in touch with Alexander, sending him updates about the families she'd known from her years behind the register. Many of them had been helped by the fund at one point or another. On the 5th anniversary of the fund's founding, Alexander organized a gathering at the community center. Not a gala or a fundraiser, just a potluck where families who'd been helped could meet each other and share their stories. Emma and Sarah came, bringing homemade lasagna and enough garlic bread to feed an army. Alexander stood at the front of the room and looked out at the faces. Hundreds of people whose lives had been changed by a chain of kindness that started with a declined credit card and a child's $20 bill. I'm not going to give a speech, he said. I'm just going to tell you a story. He told them about the day his card was declined, about a little girl who offered her last $20, about discovering that she was saving money for her mother's surgery, about learning that trust wasn't a weakness and generosity wasn't transactional. I thought I was helping Emma and her mother, Alexander said, but they helped me more than they'll ever know. They reminded me that being vulnerable enough to accept help is just as brave as being generous enough to give it. Sarah stood up, Emma beside her, and we learned that asking for help isn't giving up. It's giving others the gift of being needed. The room erupted in applause, but not for Alexander or Sarah or Emma, for each other, for the web of connection and support they'd built together, for the proof that kindness multiplied when you gave it away. So what does any of this mean for you? Maybe you're facing your own impossible choice right now. Maybe you're the person with $20, wondering if it's enough to make a difference. Maybe you're the one whose card just got declined, and you're wondering if you can trust anyone again. Here's what I learned from Emma and Sarah and that moment in the grocery store. Worth isn't about what you can afford. It's about what you choose to give when you have every reason to hold back. Trust isn't stupid just because it can be broken. Isolation is the real prison. And help comes in the strangest packages, sometimes in the form of a declined credit card, sometimes in a child's crumpled $20 bill, sometimes in the courage to accept what you can't do alone. The Emma Chun Emergency Medical Fund is still active, still helping families, still proving that one act of generosity can echo through thousands of lives. If you've got a story about unexpected kindness, about the moment someone helped you when you needed it most, or about the time you gave even when you had nothing, share it. That's how the echo continues. And maybe, just maybe, we all learn that the most valuable things in life can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in moments, in choices, in the courage to stay generous even when the world gives you every reason not to. What moment changed how you see generosity? I'd love to hear about it.